let everybody into the Zoom room. Well, I guess I could say this in the Zoom room. Do you know that it is Pittsburgh's birthday today?
I didn't know
Of
that.
course you don't. Nobody does.
Yeah.
Why should you know? Not only that, but Pittsburgh has like 7 birthdays.
Okay.
You know, like when Fort Pitt was built, when they named it Fort Pitt, when Fort
Mhm.
Duquesne was built, when they incorporated the city. So, yeah, I've got my, yeah,
I think we should mention that at the beginning here because I'm a Pittsburgher and I did not know that.
exactly. I know. Yeah, you have to dig deep into the data. So let's see. It is 7 o'clock.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Trying to do that nice fade out that we always talk to Ellie about. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Generation 9/11. I'm your host, Sean Hall. Super excited to have you all join us for the episode here tonight, where we're going to be commemorating the 2003 invasion of Iraq. We're going to get to that in just a few short minutes. But we have a couple things to talk about first hand. First, Todd, you just told me it was somebody's birthday today, and I was amazed by it. And I'll bet most of the people, if not all the people in this room, probably don't know whose birthday it is.
I'm very curious if anybody knows what birthday it is. It's not of a person, but actually of a place. That gives it away.
Raise your hand if you...
That is so great. I love it because I didn't know either. And why should you know? It is Pittsburgh's 205th birthday. Yay. Pittsburgh has like 5 birthdays.
We do.
A birthday for every month. Because I know November 27th is like the day that General Forbes named Fort Pitt. And we've celebrated. We went over the top celebrating that in 2018. And because that was 1758, I believe. And we turn around and it's our birthday again. Mm-hmm. And we're younger.
We threw a parade for Julia Parsons. What are we going to do for the 205th of Pittsburgh?
205th, yes. On March 18th, 1816, Pittsburgh was incorporated as a city.
You're welcome.
Impressed with that, Terry Swank? She's from Columbus. She doesn't care about Pittsburgh at all. Good to see you, Terry. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Terry. Hi, everybody. So yes, well, I also want to give the floor here to Mary Hamblett. Thank you so much for coming on, Mary. I'm going to ask you to unmute from Leadership Pittsburgh. I'm going to share my screen here so that everyone can see what you guys got going on over there.
Hi, Sean. Hi, Todd. Thanks so much for having me. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Hey, so just quick announcement. Appreciate the time. Leadership Pittsburgh Inc. is a nonprofit. We've been around for about 37 years. Our mission is to strengthen regional leadership through programs, partnerships, and connections. And we do that primarily through several different community engagement and civic leadership programs, one of which is our CLCV Community Leadership course for veterans. We've graduated 7 different classes. We are recruiting right now for CLCV 8. And its applications are due April 30th, and it's a 6-month course, and it's going to run kicking off in July, going till about November, end of November. And Community Leadership Course for Veterans is aimed at leveraging the skills and experiences of post 9/11 veterans by exposing them to new leadership networks and opportunities for service to Southwestern Pennsylvania. So if you are a post 9/11 veteran, or if you know a post 9/11 veteran and someone who might be interested in the program, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to throw my contact information in the chat, and you can always just send me an email or reach out via phone, and love to talk to you a little bit about the program. Thanks for letting me make an announcement both to Todd and to Sean.
Of course, Mary. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Full disclosure, of course, I'm a non-veteran, and I've been here with VBC for almost a year now, and every time I'm a part of Todd's events, I'm always so in awe of the level of historical context and knowledge that Todd can throw out in a moment's notice. I could ask him a question at any time right now, and he would have understanding of what's going on in history at that point. I always feel sort of behind the 8 ball though whenever it comes to me putting any sort of historical spin on our Generation 9/11 programs. But tonight being the commemorating this invasion of Iraq, thought I'd go over a couple quick points of sort of the lead up to that invasion. Nothing too in depth here because I really want to hear from the veterans tonight. I think that us learning from your experiences on the ground and in the air there during that time is what's really most valuable. So the understanding that February 5th in 2003, that was whenever Colin Powell made his presentation to the UN Security Council, was trying to garner international support for a multinational coalition. Now that fell apart, didn't really materialize. But on March 17th, President Bush issued a 48-hour deadline for Saddam and his sons to leave Iraq. Of course, he refused. The shock and awe campaign began March 19th with airstrikes of Baghdad and Mosul. That goal was to decapitate the leadership of Iraq. The war planners were really hoping that the campaign would expedite the conflict, demoralize Iraqi forces, speed up their surrender. The ground assault then followed on March 20th. Coalition sent about 300,000 troops into Iraq. Around 2/3 of those were U.S. That's a lot of people. We also received some support from the Peshmerga in northern Iraq and Kurdistan. Most of the Iraqi military was quickly defeated and the coalition occupied Baghdad on April 9th. Now, other operations sort of were occurring against the Iraqi army, including the capture and occupation of Kirkuk on the 10th of April and the attack and the capture of Tikrit on the 15th of April. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing those. And then on May 1st, very soon after that, President Bush declared end of major combat operations with the mission accomplished. I won't go too heavy at all into, obviously, weapons of mass destruction. We all know the answer to that. I don't feel like that gets us anywhere tonight. Really more interested in hearing about the stories on the ground. Do have a picture here of Baghdad that I can show you from the airstrike campaign, if everyone can see that. And then I thought this was an interesting picture of, I would assume, and maybe Todd, you can correct me, I'm assuming that this is Marines making their way into Iraq, into a sandstorm.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, a sandstorm for sure. Marines, I don't know.
Anyone see the Jeep can tell us if this is Army or Marines?
It's a Humvee.
Humvee?
And both services use them.
Both services?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any way to tell.
Can you on it a little bit?
Zoom in. Let's see here.
Like a bumper.
Could you go full? Yeah.
Full screen. Hold on.
Slideshow or whatever.
Yeah, I can do that. Hold on.
You know what? I'll find that picture, Sean, and I'll do it.
Yeah,
Why
that'd be
don't you
great.
escape from share screen, and I'll find it, and we'll do a deep dive. We got to know if these are Marines or Army.
The unit designators are usually on the bumper, and that might be able to tell you.
Well, the problem is that all of a sudden my computer decided to remove the option for me to go exit screen.
No, it's down below, I bet.
Oh, they took it down there.
Yeah.
Those sneaky.
Yep. That happens.
Technical difficulties here. My apologies.
Is it not down below?
It's not down below. Where did they put this?
You know what? I could make you stop sharing.
There you go. Thank you.
John said it's Marines.
Okay.
John Hawes said it was
John Hawes in the chat.
Yeah.
I read through Generation Kill, and that was about the recon Marines and how they were the tip of the spear, really driving straight into Iraq, and they're forcing their way right up to Baghdad as fast as possible. There it is, right there. Thank you, Todd. All right. And so, anyway, I'd like to begin tonight by talking with Josh Cannon, who is here. He served in the Marines as a linguist in Iraq, and I wanted to ask Josh, number one, That's a huge beard since the last time I saw you, which is pretty epic. Good job, man. How's the traffic in Iraq?
Well, we obviously gummed up the roads as we were driving to Baghdad, and my memory is that there were numerous days where we were traveling at 5 miles an hour, or we're just stopped, waiting for stuff to clear out in front of us. I remember we drove almost 24 hours a day, which meant we had multiple drivers, and some guys had. Sometimes we slept and we'd dig these what we called scratches, which are those really shallow graves that you see pictures of. But other times we would drive through the night, so we had to stick a guy in the back of the Humvee so he could sleep, and then get a new driver up there. So yeah, pretty congested, as I recall.
Yeah. Now, describe to me what a linguist. What does a linguist do in the Marines, especially during an invasion?
So linguists are part of the intelligence community. 2670, the 2670 series. I was a 2671. That's the MOS designator. That means Arabic linguist. And what linguists are trained to do is intercept wireless communication. Well, intercept any communication, but primarily wireless communication, translate it, and provide and gain intel from it. And so my job as an Arabic linguist was to listen in on the Iraqi army and translate everything they were saying, but they weren't saying anything. So pretty quickly, I remember we had maybe some communication at random times, but generally speaking, the Iraqi army was silent, or either they went silent or we just weren't able to capture what they were actually communicating. So very quickly we transitioned to walkie-talkies and analog cell phones, and we're capturing.
Very quickly, as soon as you were in Kuwait, or as the invasion?
No, yeah. During the invasion, we had our equipment up and running, looking for military frequencies that we. I was a corporal, so I wasn't really a decision maker, and I wasn't that informed. My best assumption is that somebody knew, hey, these are the frequencies that the Iraqi military is going to use. This is the type of encryption they're going to use, and we had equipment that could break encryption. But my memory is that I can't speak for other units, but I never captured Iraqi military communications. And as I recall, we figured that out pretty fast, like within a week or two, that there was just nothing to be done there. Oh yeah. And so then we switched to basically civilian wireless communication and monitoring that. And once we did that, we were listening to people talking about us. People were watching us. The intelligence there was much more fruitful. Mm-hmm. I didn't always take things seriously, as I hope this picture illustrates. I was trying to wear every piece of gear that I could at one time.
What was the heat index there?
So this is probably late March, could be early April, but this is this is while we were still on that really, really slow push to Baghdad. So it wasn't the heat, it wasn't the height of the summer, but I'm sure it was at least 80 or 90 degrees.
Yeah. Now, we all heard here back in the States, like shock and awe. You read, like I said, you read the book, and it's all about the push to Baghdad as fast as possible. But you're saying like 5 miles per hour on the road to Baghdad. Like, obviously, there's some sort of disconnect there.
Well, so I was with 3-1, which is 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines. The infantry battalion. I was on infantry, as I said. I was intelligence, but I was attached to 3-1, and we were like, if I remember correctly, like 3rd in line, and there were 2 units that were ahead of us. There was, I think it was 4-1, which is a reserve LAR unit, and there was 1st Recon, and so those 2 units, if anybody was shocking and awing people, it was the light armored vehicles, which had much bigger machine guns than we did. And it was the recon units, which were designed to be very fast and very effective. And then the infantry unit that I was attached to, we were the kind of the cleanup crew. So we might have been the shock and awe. We might have been round 2.
You were the awe to the shock?
No, we were the let's just move slowly and let everyone else do the fighting. I mean, I don't think that was our intention. The unit was very brave and ready to fight, but 4-1 and 1st Recon, they handled it all as far as I mean, we got into a couple of scrapes, but it was always very minor. It was people taking pot shots at us. There were no sustained engagements that I recall on the move up. All of the fighting, and at night we would hear the fighting. We'd hear LARs, 50 caliber machine guns going to town, and the next day we'd drive across the road and there'd be 50 caliber casings all over the road, and then obviously other signs of battle. And so it was happening. It just wasn't happening to us very much.
Did you have a lot of rehearsal in the buildup when you were in Kuwait?
No, we were in Kuwait for almost about a month, maybe a little bit less than a month. And we called Kuwait the Wait, I think because we were trying to do something like NAM, like we wanted some kind of cool name, but the Wait was a pretty good description because all we did is hang out. I don't remember doing any training, any preparation. I mean, I take that back. We did a little bit of work. We recognized that we weren't completely certain as to what radio frequencies we would be trying to capture. And so I do remember working with some guys to figure out different how to make homemade antennas that would be more effective at capturing different frequencies. But that wasn't training. That was, hey, there's this thing we might have to do. Why don't we experiment now so that if we have to do it later, we'll be faster at it.
Yeah.
But I was part of 2nd Radio Battalion out of Camp Lejeune, which is kind of funny because I switched over. So Camp Lejeune is, one of the biggest Marine Corps bases, and everything is 2nd. So 2nd Radio Battalion, 2nd Marine Division. Everything comes with a 2. All the MUs, the Marine Expeditionary units are all 2-2, 2-4, 2-6. But I deployed with a Camp Pendleton crowd of the 1st Marines, and they were all 1. Everything has a 1. So not that that's super relevant, but I always got a kick out of that I never hung out with my own people from my own base. It was always people from Pendleton.
So would this have been some of your people here, Josh, in this picture blown up?
So I'm not sure if that is 1st Marines 5th Battalion, which I think is what John was guessing. I don't remember where they were. I don't remember interacting with them. They might have been behind us, or they might have gone into Iraq via a different route. I don't know for sure.
And what would the W be for?
Yeah.
So I don't really know. I actually. Somebody
Todd,
else might know.
I think that's a combined anti-armor team. You have the TOWs there. You have the Mark 19 grenade launcher. So that may be a lead element of a convoy with they call it a CAT. It could be a Marine unit just by the weapons.
Is this a TOW right here?
Yeah, that's a TOW missile launcher. Yeah.
Can you explain what that is? I'm fascinated by that. I'm sorry to hijack this.
No, I totally agree.
You told me about this, Brad, and I had never really understood what it was before.
That's a TOW. That's a tube-launched, optically guided wired missile TOW, I believe. It's good for 3,700 meters, and it's a rocket that has many rockets on the side of it. When you fire the missile, there's a wire or wires that come out from the rear of the missile that attach to the gun. So the gunner has an optical sight, and he keeps the sight on the target. As he moves the sight, the impulse goes down the wires and fires many rocket pods on the missile, corrects the flight of the missile, and puts it in on target. So it takes a pretty well-trained gunner to keep it steady aim on it and not to flinch or make too many fast movements. If they do, then the missile can go erratic.
They were saying in the chat, both Ben and John both said that's a weapons company.
Yeah.
Weapons company. Okay.
And Dan Vaughn.
Yeah, I wanted to know what LAR stands for. He had mentioned LAR. What's that stand for?
That's light armored reconnaissance.
All right.
So that's a unit composed of light armored vehicles, LAVs.
Understood. Thank you.
That was in reading the book, that seemed like it was a point of contention with the Marines. They were not happy that they were pushing towards Baghdad that quickly through these cities and towns with light armored Humvees. it seemed quite dangerous to be going through the main fight, not really armored up.
Yeah, so they call it up armored Humvees when they're better armored, and ours was not up armored. And I could be wrong about this because this is 18 years ago now. But I don't remember actually having armor in my vest.
Looking at something else.
So they kind of just rushed us on out there without armored vests. I mean, I had my Kevlar helmet and my vest and whatnot, but that's just good for like shrapnel and knives. It's not terribly good for bullets. I mean, I would rather have it than not if I got shot. But and I remember writing a letter to my parents being like, yeah, I don't really have anything that's that significant standing between me and any of these bullets other than maybe my helmet. And I didn't think that big of it. I was like, well, we're in a rush, we had to get there. And I remember one of my parents wrote back and said, that is criminal. I said, well, I don't know.
Why did you decide to tell your parents that?
I was, how old was I? I was 20. I turned 21 during the invasion. So I was just kind of young and stupid. And it just kind of like, I didn't even think to be angry about it. I just thought, isn't this funny? Like, isn't this goofy? We're going into combat without, bulletproof material.
And this is you digging a ditch with a fork?
Yeah. So, I mean, to be generous, you could call it a foxhole.
Okay.
And this is one of those moments when we were just hanging out probably like for 5 or 6 hours. And so I dug it not because we anticipated using it for a fight. I dug it because I was bored. And what's, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but what I find fascinating is that I then became an archaeologist, and I did most of my work in Turkey. And thinking about what is happening here from an archaeological point of view, especially since this is southern Iraq, it makes me shudder because in that pile of dirt underneath a shovel behind me could very easily have been some 4,000-year-old pottery. Or some, probably not something like that you would find in a museum necessarily, but very, very easily there would have been material there that an archaeologist would be fascinated by. And I just hacked through it with that mattock you can see on the top left of the corner.
The cradle of civilization, right?
Yeah, I mean, the soil that I'm standing in, people were living and building cities there for at least 5,000 years. So the chances of somebody having left something there are actually fairly high when you consider there was Mary's saying 7,000 years. 7,000, it kind of depends on how you want to define cities, but yeah, I mean the Iraqi people were living there for, probably tens of thousands of years. People were living there, but pottery, people only started making pottery. I think Mary's right. 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 years ago was when we started seeing pottery. So anyway, the point is human beings had plenty of time to leave stuff there for an archaeologist to find, but there I am hacking away at it.
Nice tattoo. Happy belated St. Patty's Day.
Oh yeah, thanks. I'm kind of impressed that comes through. Oh, and there I am sitting in it, probably sitting on top of like some beautiful vessel that should go to a museum, but not even knowing it.
And this was where?
So that's Babylon.
Okay.
Standing in this picture is from the driveway of Saddam Hussein's palace. Well, I think he had 5 of them, 7. He had several palaces. This is one of them. And the crumbled looking buildings in the forefront there behind those trees, that's the original Babylon. And then what's behind it, the more finished looking stuff, that is Saddam Hussein's reconstruction of the walls and the buildings of Babylon. And he had stamped, I think it was his initials in like every 100th brick, because I believe Nebuchadnezzar, who was a Babylonian king around 600 BC, he had done that. And so Saddam Hussein was mimicking that old Babylonian king. And obviously he did not finish his project.
You're a part of an invasion force, and 2 questions pop into my mind. One is, crossing the border into Iraq and just the feeling of what that is, of like, we're an invading force and what that feels like entering. And then you're there and you're like, we're just hanging out in Saddam's palace. Like, you know, we had an interpreter on a couple of weeks back that was like, I wasn't even allowed to look at the palaces, let alone when I entered one, and felt like I was so out of my element that it freaked me out. What were those two experiences like for you?
Well, both are very surreal, and I often think and talk about it in ways that I don't think I was. It has to do with maturity, but also has to do with just the mental ability to take all of this in. I don't think I was ready in either regard to truly understand the significance of these factors. I remember when we crossed the Kuwaiti border, and anyone else here who did likewise, there's this massive trench, and it is such a visual marker of like, you are crossing it's a political line, but we've made it physical here with this massive trench that we dug. And it was during the sandstorm that we crossed it. And I remember kind of looking out, like squinting out, and just like, I think I took a picture or two of it. And I was like, wow, this feels really significant, but I don't think I understand it. And then likewise with going to Saddam's palace, it was just kind of surreal. I don't think that the impact or the significance of it really got to me until later in life. I remember I had this rinky-dink video camera, and I was like taking videos of it. And then when I came home, I showed my aunts and my uncles and my family that video, and they're like, I can't believe how privileged we are to be able to see inside of Saddam's palace. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that would be kind of a neat way to feel about this. For me, it was just that thing I did that day.
Right.
and it was a palace. You know, I don't think there's any pictures in what you have of the palace itself, but it was a massive mansion on top of a hill overlooking the ruins of Babylon. It was unambiguously a palace. But it had been stripped. So when we went in there, it was completely, oh yeah, there you go. There's the doors to it. It had been stripped. So when we went in there, it was just this big empty palace. So no furniture. There were some paintings like that were on the wall, murals, I guess you would call them. Those were still up. And I never really understood what happened. I don't know if the Iraqis had looted it before we got there, or if the military had yanked all that stuff out of there. I never really, I'm sure somebody knows what happened to it.
Right. And also, Todd, I'm going to ask you to unmute. I want to ask you if there's anybody in the room that you'd like to say hello to that we haven't seen for a while.
Asking me to unmute is a dangerous thing.
I know. I love danger.
Yeah, you're living on the edge. Yeah, plenty of people. Justin Thomas. Justin, my old friend, is here with us.
Hi, Todd.
Hey, how are you? It's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. Been busy. Pandemic. 2 kids now. So
2 kids now. Congratulations. Yeah. I think last time I saw you, it was just one.
Just one, yeah.
Now you were close, and same with John Haw, was very close to the invasion, right, of March 20th. It came a little bit after that initial invasion.
Yeah. So we landed in Kuwait on May 1st, which was mission accomplished day. And our impression was once we got off the plane, we had heard that President Bush went on the ship, the big banner, and we thought we would just turn around, get back on the plane, and go back home. But,
so that was the expectation, that because officially the invasion phase was really only about a month and 40 days or so. And May 1st, mission accomplished. The invasion had succeeded. Baghdad was taken, and you were just going to be there to kind of police up.
Yeah. We thought it was going to be like Desert Storm, like we're out of here in 90 days kind of, scenario.
Right.
It wasn't.
And it wasn't. And you were National Guard.
Army Reserve.
Army Reserve. Okay, I'm sorry. And could you tell us what your job was?
I was an MP. So I know over the generations, the job of MP has changed. It was actually nice. There's like, we got to do more of the combat side of the MP mission, just convoy support. We didn't do our company didn't do enemy prisoner of war work, but we did more of the route security, route reconnaissance, convoy support. And then what ultimately is we became the advisors and trainers to the new Iraqi police force, IPF, or that's what we called them back then. So
you've mentioned already in this conversation the up-armoring of the Humvees and how the Humvees were not armored. And I remember that as being an outrage, and I remember being outraged at it.
Mhm.
But now that I'm listening to you talk about it, I guess there was no reason to armor them because there weren't IEDs yet, right? That would come later.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, that wasn't really a concern initially going up. Like when, we never really thought, oh, we could really use some armor. And what Josh was saying about like the plates for the vests, like they actually just like at the last minute handed us our plates, like here, because we were a little later and being in Kuwait later is closer to the line of logistics. But yeah, we got issued the new vests. We flew over, I believe, with like Vietnam era flak vests, and then we got the new vests, and then eventually we got the plates. So that was our armor, was what was on your body. And then yeah, we started realizing we needed to up armor a few months in. We made our own armor.
But yeah, I do. And I want to ask you about that. And I want to ask about the IEDs, with the improvised explosive devices that the insurgents began planting on roads after the initial invasion, and how you responded to that. But you mentioned and I'm sorry, I get so deep into the weeds here, but what's the difference between a Vietnam era flak jacket and a, modern flak jacket?
Well, Vietnam era flak jacket is, I don't even know what the level of Kevlar or what the ballistic protection on it is. I'm sure it's significant. But the new vests are more like a police officer's bulletproof vest.
Okay.
Which is ballistically rated, which stopping a rifle round or from an AK-47 is not going to happen with a traditional bulletproof vest. But with these plates, with the plates, I believe at the time you could do 3 direct shots into a plate before it cracked. And then,
so significantly more protection than the Vietnam era. Dan Vaughn.
Yeah, the flak jacket was just for flak.
Okay.
Things like that. It wouldn't stop a AK-47 round or things, whatever, but it was just for that purpose.
Did you routinely wear it or not wear it because of the heat and the weight?
No, it was, I continually wore it, and all my fire team did too. I was a fire team leader, and I made sure everyone wore it.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. And Josh, thank you so much too. Stick around. We're going to open up conversation throughout. I also want to turn to Hughes Turner here in just a second, but John Hawes, you just shared a picture that,
oh my gosh, John,
yeah.
This picture.
Well,
you look like my punk neighbor down the street, the kid who trashes my house on Devil's Night.
No, that was me at age of 19, living in Garden Saddam's palace.
Oh my gosh. What a great picture.
So
what are you guarding here on the right?
So this was the what we called ECP, the entry control point to the palace complex. And this palace complex we took over at the time. Said I was not special forces, but I worked for special forces and they took over that palace as their headquarters. And that's where like Saddam's zoo was. So none of the animals were there, but like all of the cages and enclosures were. It was part of like that complex is that palace overlooked like an official zoo and big pond area. Saddam.
Was this a zoo that this is such a stupid question. Could people visit this zoo as we do here in Pittsburgh, or this was his zoo and he could?
I have no idea.
I think they ate the animals.
Like Michael Jackson's, amusement park. Only he gets to use it. A great picture, John. Thanks for sharing.
And John, you arrived when?
I deployed April 11th.
Okay.
And my first mission into country, I spent probably maybe 10 days in Kuwait. By the end of April, I was doing my first mission into Najaf, Iraq.
Okay.
I want to switch over to Hughes Turner. Hughes, you're new to the VBC. Thank you for joining us. You were a part of the invasion, am I correct?
Yeah, invasion and pre-invasion. and I operated at the strategic level. I was part of the general planning staff for 3rd Army, which then became the Army component to what was later known as the Coalition Forces Land Component Command. So for us, if I were to put things in context, Iraqi freedom actually for us began in the late summer of 2001, just before 9/11. And this is what I mean by that. We were preparing for a pretty frequent exercise we had with the Egyptians called Bright Star. And so we were prepping for that exercise in September, going through our rehearsal, staffing stuff that you do at a general officer headquarters. And then on 9 September, at one of our typical bi-weekly staff meetings where we have, the intel briefs and the operations brief, the intel guys briefed on the assassination of the Northern Alliance commander in Afghanistan by the name of Massoud. I think that was on 9 September. That kind of caught our ears. And then 2 days later, 9/11 occurred. And a lot of things got set in motion. And I think that at that time, I had just been assigned to 3rd Army as the Senior Army Reserve Advisor to P.T. Michelshek, who was the 3-star general in command of 3rd Army at the time. I literally within 2 hours after the second tower fell, a lot of comms between our headquarters and CENTCOM, and Tommy Franks was the commander of CENTCOM at the time. And the question was posed, what is it that we should do at this particular moment in time? And the recommendation by our staff and General Michelshek was to go ahead and activate the CFLC, the Coalition Forces Land Component Command at that time, and to prepare for potential deployment overseas to deal with the situation that seemed to be developing in Afghanistan. And so literally within 72 hours, we had a liaison team from the Canadians and from the Brits. And this is only at 3rd Army headquarters, and we were located at Fort McPherson, Georgia in Atlanta. And then
that's where you were on 9/11.
That's where I was. That's where 3rd Army was headquartered at. And then almost concurrently at CENTCOM headquarters, you started seeing all the other coalition flags standing up outside the headquarters as other liaison teams from other allies started to show up. So we started our deployment, and we also had a forward element already in Kuwait routinely. So we rotate people in and out of Kuwait. So that became our staging base initially for headquarters elements for what later became known as Enduring Freedom with Afghanistan. And then some of us, including myself, moved forward to a place called K2, which isn't a mountaintop in the Himalayas, but Karshikhanabad in Uzbekistan. So a lot of things occurred at that time. And I'll put this in context where it makes sense to Iraqi freedom. You just threw up a Time magazine cover, looks like.
Yeah, you sent me this in sort of our communication, said this is sort of how we're.
This particular photograph, and this was, I think, in the beginning of March of 2002, which was our first major combat operation against Al-Qaeda and Taliban forces in a place called Shayakot Valley. And there were 2 brigades, as I recall, and certainly there were some special operators also operating in Afghanistan. But the 2 major pieces were the Rakkasans out of the 101st, and then we just received 1 brigade out of the 82nd that came forward to Afghanistan. The sum total of our force package in Afghanistan in late 2001 and 2002 was 8,000. That includes the tip of the spear, your combat pieces, and your logistical tail. So it wasn't a whole lot.
Okay.
And for a number of us, we always ask the question, who's putting the cap on the number of combat elements we can have in Afghanistan, which in our mind was a failed nation state. And when you think about the numbers of 8,000, there are police forces in the US that are larger than 8,000.
These were the guys that were on horseback riding against Taliban.
Well, that was the special ops guys and CIA guys early on in the conflict. But that particular picture was at the beginning of our first major combat piece against the Taliban forces. And if you notice the unit patch, that particular soldier is out of the 101st. The significance of that photo is a young man by the name of Specialist David Marks, I believe, took that picture. He's a combat photographer assigned to a reserve element of the Public Affairs Detachment, which was forward deployed and attached to 10th Mountain, which was the other operating headquarters. Actually, Buster Hagenbeck was the senior ranking guy in Afghanistan at the time. But the significance of this was just 6 weeks earlier, prior to that photo, that young man was sitting in a classroom at the University of Alabama.
Wow.
He was a reservist in a reserve unit that got mobilized and then forward deployed. And he wound up being attached during this particular Operation Anaconda, and was one of the photographers on the ground with the troops. And people, killed to get on the cover of Time magazine. And here you have this young kid who had been a student sitting in a classroom earlier, less than 2 months earlier, and now finding himself deployed in a, as we call it, come as you are war in Afghanistan. He snaps this picture, and it gets to be a cover photo for Time magazine.
So we were kind of already pulling from reserves that early in the Afghanistan war, is what you're saying.
We were. And in fact, some of the initial combat casualties were Army National Guard Special Forces guys out of the 19th and 20th SF groups that had been in country for a while and linked up with the CIA Special Activities Divisions and some of the other active component Special Forces guys on the ground. So some of our initial combat casualties were, in fact, reserve component guys in Afghanistan. So,
if you don't mind, I would love you to go back. I'd like to go back to your comment that at the end of 2001, early 2002, there was a grand total of about 8,000 American personnel on the ground in Afghanistan. And you wondered why that ceiling was so low on the numbers of troops in Afghanistan. I think I know the answer, but did you find the answer soon?
Well, yeah, I mean, discovery learning. One of my principal duties at being the senior Army Reserve advisor is just giving advice to the commanders on our capabilities within the reserve components in both National Guard and Army Reserve, the mobilization process and force packages, because we assembled all that and we'd make the request, back through CENTCOM and Big Army to get units mobilized and brought forward. And what caught our attention was there was a requirement, at least from our intel guys, to get an intel element out of the reserves for deployed. And they identified a particular unit and get them mobilized and brought forward. That got killed. By guys at Forces Command and at DA, and said, well, we don't think so. No explanation was given, but I think at about the spring of 2002, we started to see a buildup of the headquarters element in Kuwait.
Got it. That's what I thought you were
going
to
say. Started to say, hey, listen, some other things are going to be happening, and there's going to be some diversion of some combat capabilities, combat support capabilities to Kuwait for buildup. Also at the same time, major combat support commands, primarily out of the reserve components, were being mobilized, and some of their headquarters and planning elements were being forward deployed to Kuwait. And on top of that, some of the key positions within Third Army, which would typically be occupied by Colonels 06s like I was, were now being replaced by name requests for specific active component general officers to now move into those roles for planning purposes. So it didn't take much at that point to kind of figure, hey, Afghanistan may become a sideshow as things start to build up in Iraq. And so you're talking, spring, summer of 2002. And that's when I actually redeployed to Kuwait to become a part of that staff and start that piece.
So you were in Kuwait for quite a while before the invasion.
Yeah, during that whole process, we're negotiating with the Kuwaitis for land use, training areas north toward the border, we call cabals, where we could station, major fighting elements for training purposes, acquiring land to put literally air bases for helicopters, which wind up being the 101st. Those type of things, which, preparing for war is a major logistical effort. And so a lot of this was going on for a good year prior to the actual execution in March of 2003. And oh, by the way, in the summer of 2002, we already had elements in Iraq of the special ops community that already were doing reconnaissance and targeting, along with probably some, I'm sure, CIA guys on the ground. So a full year before. And oh, by the way, if you recall back then, every time the Iraqis sneezed, we would hit something in Iraq. And that wasn't, it wasn't random. We took out their eyes and ears, radar sites, things of that sort. So there was a method to the madness, even a year prior. So you start to remove some of the capabilities in the event the decisions made to move forward into Iraq, which was a year later. So that's why I want to set the table up, saying for me and a lot of us at the strategic level, Iraq began when we deployed forward for enduring freedom.
Now, as the invasion happened, where were you stationed, and when did you enter Iraq?
I probably the first week during phase 1, actually, yeah, about day 10 of initial phase of combat operations, when major units crossed the barriers and started to push up Highway 80 toward Baghdad. And I'm sure that folks at the tactical level, I think you have a number of other Iraqi freedom vets that were at that level. Everything kind of got channeled through our forward base along the border called Camp Navstar. And then some elements pushed forward north. The Marines and the Brits would execute a right at this small Iraqi town called Safwan and head toward Qasr, which is a port city in Iraq, where we set up, actually took over from the Brits, a prisoner of war camp. The prisoner of war camp, and I heard one of the other guys who was a reservist, it sounds like he was with the combat support element, but the bulk of almost all of enemy prisoner of war activities are run by reserve component MPs. And so they had a couple of what we call EPW battalions take over from the Brits to establish holding areas for Iraqi prisoners. And at the same time as the Brits and the Marines executed their right to Qasr and then pushed north toward Basra.
And was that to secure the oil fields?
No, it was to have a port in which we could bring ships in, but it turned out that it wasn't deep enough. So there was a lot of dredging that had to occur in that area. So a lot of stuff, got conveyed by land.
And did you experience, just like Josh was saying, like he didn't have much resistance as they made their way slowly, slowly up north?
I think it was sporadic. It's kind of, if I could further set the table, because at some point in 2002, I came back to the States to give a briefing and update on where we were in Afghanistan. And we had a planning conference at the Army War College up at Carlisle Barracks. And all the major commanders, Petraeus, Ordiano's team, members of the Third ID were all there to specifically discuss Iraq. And so it was interesting even early on what we would need. And the reason why I mention that is because at that time, Ray Ordiano, who later became an Army Chief of Staff, was commanding general of 4th ID. And discussions as we looked at how we were going to execute what we called Op Plan 1003 Victor, if we had to go into Iraq, was looking at bringing the 4th Infantry Divisions south out of Europe through Turkey and into northern Iraq. But the Turks killed that. And so we wind up loading the 4th Infantry Division on ships and going through, Suez and everything to get to Kuwait. And they probably got rolled into the fight probably second or third week as things started to push forward.
Was there a force that did come from Turkey? This showing on the map here into, was that Bashur?
I think there may have been staging there. I think it was the 173rd Airborne. They actually jumped into Kirkuk or out in that area in northern Iraq. But I'm not sure if we pushed anything out of Turkey, other perhaps maybe some special operators. We also had special operators that probably pushed in from Jordan into Iraq.
John Haas, you were shaking your head. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Just agreeing, the 173rd did jump into northern Iraq, so they likely staged from that area as well. Besides that, just special operations.
Yeah.
And from earlier when I said the Peshmerga, was this the northern area, was that where we mostly worked with them?
Yes.
And that was done early on. I think that's why the special operators and CIA guys were on the ground in the summer of 2002.
As you got closer to the Sunni Triangle, and and the more I'm reading, the more I'm hearing about the Sunni Triangle, was how dangerous did it become? Did it just increase in kineticness as you went in? That's even a word.
Is that question directed to me, or?
Yeah, as you kind of made your way into Iraq, did it become more kinetic at the closer you got to Baghdad?
I think so. I think the thing that struck me, and those of us, who've been in combat, and some of us who have not been in combat, war is something you train for. And I saw things that, I never saw before in terms of how we actually deploy. And for instance, we push through the barriers, you have tanks going through and armored personnel carriers and things of that sort, Bradley fighting vehicles to engage. But the next jump off point where the next target may be, at that point, they actually get loaded onto HETs, heavy equipment trucks, and actually pushed up there by trucks where they're offloaded again to engage the enemy. That never crossed my mind. And my recollection was as the 4th ID, I remember passing a bunch of tanks loaded on trucks with their crews sitting on top of the turrets, being trucked up to their deployment site somewhere else in Iraq for combat engagement. But that's how they move.
Where was this picture taken?
This picture is taken over a bridge in central Iraq, crossing, I believe, the Euphrates River, not terribly far from Al-Nasiriyah, which is the Jessica Lynch fame, and an air base in central Iraq called Talil. What was interesting here is that we passed a number of I want to say abandoned trucks, but units, Marines and otherwise, who had left trucks behind with a small security force to be policed up because the trucks broke down. And so it was not unusual for us to run into maybe 2 or 3 Marines left with a vehicle that had broken down, who'd been there for a couple of days waiting to be policed up by somebody to rejoin their units. So that was not unusual, at least along the MSR from our perspective. But the other thing that I remember about this particular picture was that we were not far from, there was a temple, a large temple. I think it's called Ziggurat, and it's in the ruins of Ur. And I remember actually visiting, we took some troops there to secure it. And this temple had literally been there for 6,000 years before the birth of Christ.
I love Josh Cannon, if you're still with us, if you know any information about that as well.
And I just remember having a conversation with the troops and just trying to put things in perspective. And I said, folks, this is really surreal because we're looking at the ruins of Ur, and I could take a picture of the ruins of Ur. It could have been in West Texas. You wouldn't be able to distinguish between West Texas and the ruins of Ur. But what was striking about that moment was that this is the intersection of all 3 major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Muslim faith, because all claim a link to Abraham, and Ur supposedly was the birthplace of Abraham. That was very surreal.
Yeah. Did you feel any sort of like, also you're standing on this sort of hollowed ground, there's a lot of destruction going on the road up to Baghdad. Was there something in your head about like, I hope we don't destroy any of this,
Well, that's why I had a security element. Keep a couple things. One, to prevent that from happening. But the other thing is to prevent young troops from pillaging those sites. I don't want to say pillaging. I mean, hey, I want a souvenir. I'll take a rock off this temple. Those are things you don't want to happen. And so that was important. The other thing that I remember during the initial course of the invasion, as units were pushing through Nanstar, is that we made a point as senior commanders to ensure that American forces did not display the American flag or the state flags on their vehicles as we pushed across the border, giving the impression that we were invading and then going to occupy their country. Mm-hmm. And so that was a point we tried to make very clear to our soldiers. There's not bragging rights, displaying the flag of Texas or the Illinois flag as you push forward, to engage the enemy or the American flag. We were very cognizant of optics.
Was there a point where that order was sort of rescinded as, we I don't want to use the term occupy, but as we were there and then helping to set up the next government and, the long, time that we were in country?
Yeah, I don't know if there was anything specific said about that. It may have just kind of evolved and morphed, over time. But yeah, it's Iraq was different, and I'll probably look at it in probably 2 distinct phases. We took Baghdad, probably in May, and we had already started planning for redeployment of some major units back to the States in September as we looked at that. But then, hell broke loose later on in the summer, if you recall, resurgence, and decisions were made to keep, for instance, the 3rd Infantry Division on the ground longer. And other elements came in as we surged to combat that piece. So I think it just underscores that, 2 things. One, we talked about wearing vests. Some had plates, some didn't. Some of the vehicles were up armored, some weren't. I'll go back to something I said earlier with Afghanistan. I think every war is a come as you are war. once the decision is made to execute, you try to get as prepared as you can. But the most important thing is get the combat pieces on the ground in country and to push forward. And interesting, I think most of folks here are familiar with our readiness status, green, yellow, red, which denotes where we are with personnel, armor, and everything in terms of readiness to execute. We knew starting Iraq, the Iraq invasion, we never got beyond yellow for logistics.
Why is that?
I just didn't have the pieces, either the production or the units weren't ready. But you're bouncing that against an execute timeline as well. And every commander, I think, kind of goes through the type of analysis in terms of decision making on whether there's an acceptable degree of risk when you make a decision, and those things happen.
I find this really intriguing, Hughes, and our audience here. Please feel free to chime in with any questions, comments. There's a lot of chat going on. Todd, I don't know if you
I would
want
love
to
to have John. I would love to have John Hawes talk about what he put in the chat here on the Zoom side. I find this so fascinating, and I can't imagine what it must have been like to see that religious pilgrimage taking place, and to, in your mind, having it justify why you were there.
Yeah, I don't remember what the opposing religious party was, opposite of Saddam. But
I guess it was the Shiites. It must have been a Shiite group.
Yes, I believe so, the Shiites. And my very first mission was into An-Najaf, which is one of the holiest cities in Iraq. And I remember as soon as we arrived there, this pilgrimage was just beginning. And over the course of days, I just watched people walking barefoot, thousands upon thousands of people walking barefoot to complete this pilgrimage to An-Najaf. And I found out at the time we were briefed that the pilgrimage had been outlawed under Saddam. And I think the last time that people had been allowed to do it, I think was sometime in the 80s, if I remember right. And watching them, basically participate and express this newfound religious freedom, no longer under, the reign of Saddam. For me, it helped to really justify, the war, the invasion, and just that, this guy was a dictator. These people should be free to do this.
How interesting.
As I recall, and maybe Mr. Haas can comment on this, I seem to recall that one of the major temples was blown up during that process between the warring factions in Iraq at that time, which led to another outbreak, as I recall.
It's very possible. I don't remember for sure. We fell in, took over a university there, and it was my first mission. It was 3 weeks in An-Najaf. And then I bounced back to Kuwait for a week and then went up to Baghdad for 6 months. We got there just after the major fighting had occurred to take the city. And that's because after the fighting had occurred, they felt free to be able to make this pilgrimage. And people walked, I want to say hundreds of miles to, complete this pilgrimage, barefoot, just filling the streets.
That's incredible. Really incredible. And this
Derek,
was, go ahead, Todd.
I want to ask, Derek, you were involved. We need to get Navy involved here.
Yeah.
Derek, were you involved in the invasion as a CB?
My unit, we were in Kuwait about 6 weeks before the crossing. Like a lot of engineer units are there to start building up at base camps, or we were unloading the maritime pre-positioning force ships down at the ports in Kuwait. The CBs were there, expanding the runways and taxiways at the Kuwaiti air bases. So we were there before the invasion, and then the tip of the spear units went through, and we were about 9 days, I think, behind the initial push. And when we entered, I was a reservist, and there was CB units certainly further north of us in the task force further north, but we were the first reserve CBs to enter Iraq, and we kind of made that that right turn that the other gentleman was talking about, and we went into the British section and for operations around the Qasr seaport area. So that's where we started out in Iraq until we pushed up further north. And it sounded like I was operating in area that he was along in the Nazaré area near the Euphrates River, in that section south of Baghdad and south of the Triangle. But we were there early on before the invasion and during.
And that seaport town that is right adjacent to Kuwait, tiny little sliver of land that Iraq has to the Persian Gulf, accessible to it wasn't deep enough to do the kind of supply unloading that.
I think that was the intent at first. And there were some shallow draft ships coming in, but I wasn't involved in that. But I do remember hearing that it wasn't suitable, that they weren't as deep water as the ports a little further south in Kuwait. Mm-hmm. So that's why there was such an effort that we were involved with down in Kuwait, unloading all those ships and getting everything staged to disperse around the camps in Kuwait pre-invasion. Like the gentleman said, there's such a logistical buildup in planning for war, and that was why units like ours were there ahead of time.
Justin puts a great question in the chat right now. Other than the Gulf War, when was the last time the reserves were used in the planning phase of a war? Reserves were called up for Korea, but I don't know if they were there early on. That was a deliberate decision that was made because they didn't want to, have a big call up of the draft for the Korean War. So they pulled people, often World War II veterans, who were now being, pulled back in for Korea. But I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that, other than I don't think there was another. I think Justin? Those are the only 3 times.
Yeah, because through VBC events and stuff, we're just knowing a little bit enough about history, like especially Vietnam. The reserves and guard was kind of a hiding place. I'm just what I heard. I don't know how true that is, but like now where I didn't know we were as involved in the pre-planning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. As so he thought. I didn't. I thought it was more of like felt like rushed to us.
And people should know, Justin, you joined in the late 90s, right?
Yeah, 99.
99. So, okay, so before 9/11.
College money. Yeah.
So you thought you were doing, 2 weeks of summer, weekend every month, and get some college funds.
Yeah. Even prior to 9/11, like a month prior at a drill, we were doing some maneuvers, if you want to call it that, and we laughed like, well, it's a good thing they'll never send us anywhere.
Wow.
And yeah, so like getting, go from that kind of like joking around, typical military humor, to 2 years later finding ourselves there, right? It
gets real serious,
woefully unprepared.
There was,
but no, it's just interesting because I was trying to think of when the last time that they were used extensively.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Did I hear somebody say woefully unprepared?
That was me. Yeah.
Oh, okay. A couple of things. A decision was made, at the DoD level at some point that certain capabilities would reside within the reserve component and the active component, and so you develop those levels of expertise. And certainly the combat service support, combat support pieces were now in the reserve components. And so you had the expertise there. Interesting, when you look at the engineers, we had some reserve units, or engineer bridging units, who were reserve components, who showed up 2 weeks before we crossed the border. So, they got shot up, got mobilized, got shot up, deployed them to Kuwait, brought them down to Erfchan, which we had just taken over, to start the training and to meld them into the active component elements, primarily the Marines, that they were going to support, literally, with 2 weeks preparation time to execute their mission. But they did it well, because that's what they trained for. The other piece that was significant, especially in Iraq, was the civil affairs piece. Almost all the civil affairs units are reserve component. And that just made absolute sense. So they did well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things like with the reserves that you know, it gets us in trouble, but also saves us is that a lot of us are multi-purpose. Like we all, like, you can have a reserve component of MPs, but you have you know, construction guy, you have a plumber, you have a civilian cop, you have a prison guard. So you have all these different like civilian skill sets that we are able to like adapt into our job in the military and adapt, improvise, overcome, steal that. And that I definitely saw that we were able to kind of turn quicker because we weren't used to the tradition and the, you know, we weren't afraid to break the rules because we pretended like we didn't know them.
Because you didn't know the rules. And that's a perfect segue to ask me a question I really want to ask you about, Justin, and that is up armoring the vehicles. And I just wanted, this is just from my memory of that time, sometime in 2003, the summer into the fall 2003, we became aware back home that the war was changing, that it was becoming an insurgency, and the keynote or the hallmark of the insurgency were these IEDs, the improvised explosive devices that were being buried in the road and were blowing up American Humvees. And then we learned that these Humvees weren't properly armored. And I remember certainly feeling the outrage at that. Although now I think about it, you know, Humvees were general purpose vehicles. They shouldn't have been heavily armored. They were not built for that kind of, you know, that kind of threat, I guess. Do you remember seeing an IED for the first time or experiencing the IED for the first time, Justin?
Fortunately, I never directly experienced an IED, but I remember our there was a team out at night, and I was on QRF and
what's
listening
QRF?
to the radio, quick response force.
Okay.
So we were on a forward operating base, and so we rotated between patrols at night, quick response for the base, and you know, just kind of numerous duties that you run through. And basically QRF is, it's a lot of boredom, hopefully. You just listen to the radio and you hear another unit out on patrol, and you know, basically you can hear, you know, they said we got hit a landmine, and then they come back and they said, I don't understand what we did, what happened, you know, road just blew up. Fortunately, no one was injured in that one. You know, just it's definitely like, and they said, you know, somebody came down and said, no, that was an IED. And we're like, oh, you know, it's like, you thought it was a mine because training up to it, you were trained to look for mines, but you know, you're also driving on a paved road, you know, which they could, you know, set up the way those roads were, but you know, it definitely was a new education. And
it was a new education. And were there members of your reserve unit who, you know, had the technical skill that you could improvise some kind of armoring?
So we used a combination of things. Those Vietnam era flak jackets and zip ties became the door armor. So we found a way to zip tie them into the doors. We took sandbags, sandbag the floors.
Wow.
We eventually, and this is the term we used, is we called it Haji armor. Is that we would find welders, Iraqi welders, and they started welding plates onto our Humvees, and then even to the point where they make a teacup, a little version of the teacup. So we used to use a lot of ingenuity and Iraqi entrepreneurship because we threw some money their way to help us out. So
Dave Seaver put a funny comment. I guess it's funny in a darkly funny way in the chat here, that a lot of the injuries that you saw, Dave, was that a joke or are you being serious? Hernias because of up armoring these vehicles.
Yeah, I was being serious. That was one of the three main non-combat injuries that we saw were the hernias on the mechanics from lifting the up armored doors and parts to put them on the Humvees.
Who would have thought?
Our mechanics were not happy with the things we were doing to those Humvees.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And we didn't care. We didn't care how happy they were. Sorry.
And eventually they did get armored, and you know,
eventually
were sent over. But
yeah,
boy, those early days, I remember how harrowing that was. And I don't remember, Carl, what were you doing at the time of the invasion? Were you drill sergeanting?
During Iraq? Yeah,
Yeah.
I was on the drill field at that time.
You were drill field. So
Yeah.
you were training the guys who we were going to be sent over.
Correct.
And were you following the news about what was happening over there in 2003?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I remember when the invasion took place. We was actually in the middle of the crucible with the recruits the night that it took place. And so we played. I mean, today it's not like back in Vietnam where you graduate boot camp and they got the plane waiting for you and you fly off. You know, it's fortunately in today's society world that the Marines are trained, and they strategically they'll man up one unit and then send the younger ones and less experienced ones to take their place back here in the rear. And you talk about they'd asked about when was the last time reserves were used very limitedly during the Gulf War. Even the typical rule of the reservists would the unit would leave from Camp Lejeune or Camp Pendleton, and the reserves would move in and take their place there during the Gulf War. Now in Iraq, in Afghanistan, they was certainly part of that pre-planned phase and more involved and deployed with the active duty forces. And I was listening to the conversations about the flak jackets and even the Gulf War. We didn't have body armor in the Gulf War. We had flak jackets and we had covers that went over top of them so we didn't look like trees in the middle of the desert. That's all we had, because we had everything green when we left to go over there, and then we eventually got desert camis. But for the packs and everything else, we just was provided with covers that would cover our existing gear, because those flak jackets, as they said, they weren't body armor. Maybe a low caliber round, a grazing it would protect you from, or shrapnel. But that was it. We were fighting with Korean War era gear still in Desert Storm. But it was after that, during the OIF, OEF, that, they started putting the money in and equipping us properly for the type of battle. Because, back in Vietnam, it was different. And we talked about the vehicles and the lack of the armor. Well, prior to this war, we wasn't moving as fast. And so if you're moving fast, you got to use vehicles. And so that's where the lesson was learned, to develop the MRAPs and the armor for that type of conflict. So, history presents itself, and, we certainly learn from history and build on and move forward.
Yes.
I want to share a picture here also. Hughes, you can describe what's going on here?
Yeah, that's the Air John General Officer War Council. This is literally within the hour after we got the execute order for Op Plan 1003 Victor, which now had a new name, Operation Iraqi Freedom. So these are the major planners, flag officer level, combat support folks. Some of the guys out of the reserves, some of our vets here may recognize some of these faces in here, but these were the logistical planners, military police senior commanders, and you get a plus if you can pick me out of the picture. But as we got the word, we're getting ready to break up. Somehow I had the presence of mind to grab the aide and say, "Hey, listen, I think this is historic. We need to take a picture." And we did.
And I really like those oversized fanny packs some of you are wearing.
I'm sorry?
I like those oversized fanny packs some of you are wearing.
That's a gas mask.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which it's a good point here. We're talking about up armored vehicles, all those things we like to have soldiers and Marines and our troops to be properly prepared to have the right equipment. One of the biggest concerns I had as a commander, and I think every commander, is complacency.
And it's real easy over time for troops, soldiers, Marines, sailors to become complacent. And in a place like Iraq, where the temperatures were hot, and on top of that, if you recall, when we kicked off the operation, we were in mock gear. We were in mock gear, that is the chemical suits that you want, with charcoal lining, temperatures near 100 degrees, dusty, and trying to keep troops in gear is a nightmare for some of the commanders, you know, because you're very concerned about making sure that your troops are protected. And it's real easy when you're feeling miserable to become very complacent. And that's where your NCOs, your sergeant majors, your first sergeants, your platoon sergeants, your squad leaders are invaluable to you to ensure that troops are paying attention, and so they stay alive.
Yeah, Hughes, you had a long career and you know, gained rank back whenever you first were, you know, you first started in the military. How much did you see this change over the course of your career? You know, we're talking about people, you know, still using the same Korean War materials up through, and like as the equipment got better, the more money got pumped into safety, different things. What did you experience as, you know, as you gained rank and responsibility?
Well, when I first came in, the day I reported to OBC was at Fort Benning, Georgia, was I think the 30th of April, 1975. I think the fall of Saigon was occurring that night. I think the last helicopters, that picture leaving the embassy compound in Saigon, that's when I reported to my OBC class officer basic course. And the other thing I remembered at that particular moment in time is that we still had South Vietnamese and Cambodian officers at Fort Benning undergoing training, who now no longer had a place to go home to. And so I was coming in at the tail end of a conscript army. And then within the next couple of years, we made the transition from a conscript army to what we call the volunteer army, or VOLAR. And I think that's where you started to see a significant shift in the quality of the training and of the type of people we were recruiting into the armed forces. So that we had a vastly superior led, trained, equipped force in 2001 compared to what we saw in 1975 as we were standing down. Armies never stand down very well. Every conflict, you never stand down very well. You can probably go back to World War II in Korea and see the same thing. But
Marines stand down even worse.
Well, can't comment on that, right? But we changed significantly in our caliber and the way we thought. I mean, whoever would have thought that the reserve component would be indispensable to our national security strategy? You know, that was serious. And there was a very telling picture, and it's kind of humorous as I recall, and some of you may recall this. There was a picture evidently of a reserve unit, and they were driving their trucks, obviously in Iraq, and in the front windshield, written on a cardboard, 2 weeks a year, my ass. They were referring to annual training, okay? Here they were in a real war moving forward. And I thought that was a very telling picture of what we are now as a total fighting force.
Well, even, you know, before we started the event tonight, Todd and I were talking about, oh, we'd love to also bring people into the conversation that were there later, 05, 06, during the surge. Terry Swank, you joined us tonight for that piece. Wanted to ask you, as we have several minutes left here, but I wanted to talk with you about your experience coming into country, during the surge, that many years after the invasion. How much did you see there was a change?
So when first of all, when the deployments happened, I was in PA school. And unfortunately, I couldn't pay a whole lot of attention as to what was going on with the war because I had to focus on school. And then, as we graduated, everyone knew that they were going to deploy to Iraq, maybe not so much Afghanistan at the time. So I deployed in 06, 07, which also happened to be the time period of the surge. I was in an ASMC, which is Area Support Medical Company, and we were sent to 3 different locations in Iraq in the Baghdad area. And so we do what's called level 2 and level 1 care. So level 2 is a big clinic, but not quite the hospital. We have capabilities of X-ray, dental, patient hold up to about 48 hours. And we do routine medical care as well as emergency trauma type care. And at all 3 locations, we were what's called FOBITs, where you live on the FOB, you don't go out on missions. Patients are brought to us. And I was initially at the level 2 clinic, the big clinic, and we had 3 doctors that rotated every 90 days. And so as the only PA at that location, and a new PA, I tried to be a sponge as much as possible, with the doctors. And so our first, so IEDs were happening during that time a lot. And then, of course, when the surge began in early 2007, when they sent 20,000 plus more troops to Iraq, and also extended the deployments from 12 months to 15 months. So units that were there under the 12-month deployment got extended 3 more months. There was a unit, a Stryker brigade out of Alaska. They finished their deployment. They were sent back to Alaska, and because of the time frame, they were actually brought back to Iraq to be part of that surge.
Mm-hmm. Was Baghdad as dangerous at that point as it was, in the early years?
I can't speak to that. I can't compare that. It was bad. Mm-hmm. Because also in Baghdad, there were so many different FOBs or camp. Plus in Baghdad, you have the green zone. That, people realize the green zone doesn't have a big bubble over it. So, mortars were being sent into the green zone. So I was at the level 2 clinic for the first 5 or 6 months. And then I was sent, and that was on the west side of Baghdad. And at Camp Liberty, which for those of you who were there, it's in the big Victory Base complex. So life was good. I had a lot of amenities. I lived in a trailer, so I was trailer trash. And I acquired some pink flamingos to put on my trailer outside. So anyways, but it was always dusty and dirty there. It didn't matter how much you cleaned. And then there's a rainy season, like in the wintertime. And so keep in mind that, you hear about the desert. It's not like what you think of like our beaches here. It's a really fine, powdery, dusty sand. And then which that's why they have all those dust storms. But then also like in the rainy season, when it gets wet, it's almost like, and I think you guys have the same kind of soil that we do here, like a clay type of substance. Mm-hmm. So when you walk and you have the way your boots are made, it like packs up underneath your boots. And it's just a big muddy mess.
There's so many shaking heads here. I can't even imagine this.
A bunch of bobbleheads, huh?
Right. And it probably made sanitation really difficult.
Yeah, during those time periods, they were cleaning the clinics 3-4 times a day, just because of, the big mess. And then, when it wasn't the rainy season, just because it, was constant dust, you constantly had to clean everything, every shift. So the medics were working 12-hour shifts, and then they switched it to they did 3 shifts for the medics, and then the doctors and myself were working 12-hour shifts. And our first trauma was an American driving one of those semi trucks with supplies, and an IED blew up under his cab, and he had a above the ankle amputation that was just barely hanging on. So that was kind of a check for all the medics and everything.
There were a lot of, I'm guessing, IED type casualties and injuries that you guys were dealing with consistently.
Yeah, a wide variety. So because of our location, we were close to, by road or by flight, a CASH, a combat support hospital, which is where they were going to go anyways, for the trauma patients. So if they were close enough to us, they bring them to us, and we would stabilize them and then medevac them to the CASH in Baghdad. So that 5 or 6 month, I was sent to Fob Shield, which is the east side of Baghdad in Sadr City, which was a really bad area. Sadr City was bad. And then plus it's during the surge. So it was, there was a lot going on. So our little fob sat inside of an Iraqi fob. The LZ was in the Iraqi fob. And you had the MOI, the Ministry of Interior, which is like a 12-story building overlooking our fob. And there were bad guys in there. They would, oh, okay, we'll play with the Americans. Oh, we'll play with the Iraqis or whatever. So because of all the IEDs that were happening, flights were like the main, unless you were out on missions, to move somebody from point A to point B, they used the helicopters. And flights were being canceled all the time to come out to our area. And sometimes, and a lot of times, actually supplies. So we had to coordinate with, there was an MP unit on the FOB, and that was the only Army unit. There were a few Marines, but otherwise, our FOB was the buildup of rule of law. There was a prison right outside the gates. It was next to the VBC, the Baghdad Police College. And so, we kind of just made do. The FOB was so small, it didn't even have a PX. But so then it was just myself and 4 medics. So the buck stopped at me. And, we had some bad days.
Something that I recently read The Forever War by Dexter Filkins, who was he was in Baghdad with the New York Times for in the early years, and something that kept bringing up in my head was, how do you sleep in that? And you're in the city, it's constant danger, and you're working long shifts, you're dealing with trauma. I can't imagine trying to get a wink is very easy.
Figure it out.
Use.
Put a uniform on somebody, they're either sleepy or they're hungry. One of the two.
True.
You you kind of figure it out. I think. I mean, that's what soldiers and Marines and sailors and airmen do. Can I say something at the strategic level, because I think it's important for us to keep in mind whenever senior leaders commit U.S. blood and treasure in conflict. Remember why we got involved in Iraq. Weapons of mass destruction.
Nothing.
Weapons of mass destruction. And I remember having very blunt conversations. We had a place in a mess hall at Camp Doha in Kuwait where us senior guys could go and talk openly over dinner, what we were planning to do. And just remember having very candid discussions with my other colleagues. I hope we find weapons of mass destruction, because that is what the president has hung his hat on for Iraq. And oh, by the way, we had identified almost 200 exploitation sites in Iraq that we were going to go to immediately to find weapons of mass destruction. And I remember having conversations with some of the senior aviators who were going to take the teams into those sites. Number one, they're concerned whether or not they would be properly prepared for any chemical or biological stuff, flying helicopters. But number two, once we got there, it became clear by day 6, day 7, we weren't finding any weapons of mass destruction. What we were finding were large weapons cache, but no weapons of mass destruction. And that became very clear, certainly within the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Dan Vaughn, it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, just a question. What was the temperature over there?
Depends what time of the year. In the winter, it can actually get cold. You were talking about, the PA was talking about the wet season. If you get down to 50, 60 degrees and you're wet in the desert, it's cold.
What was it when it wasn't? When it was sunny?
Probably the best time of year is probably the spring, when I think Mr. Hall said it was probably in the 80s. But I remember in the summer going outside at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the temperature was probably still over 100 degrees.
Oh, that sounds like air conditioning in Vietnam.
I knew that's where you were going with that, Dan.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
When you're
without humidity.
you're looking at 115 and 120 degrees, that's air conditioning. 100 degrees.
It's not a competition, Dan.
It was a dry heat.
The dry heat.
It was a dry heat.
And the reality is, you hear people compare heat. They say, "Wow, at least it's a dry heat." I'm going to tell you, folks, hot is hot. Hot, dirty, and dusty is hot, dirty, and dusty. I don't care whether it's dry heat or humid. You're miserable.
I agree. Just the humidity was the nasty part of it. That's what it was about.
And they weren't wearing mop suits and
yeah,
Vietnam too much either.
I'm going to wear a plastic bag in 110-degree weather. Peter Fens.
So it was during the summertime, it was so hot. We had these huge water reservoirs. I mean, they were like 15 feet high. I happened to be lucky. I was in a kennel, which meant there was air conditioning, because the air conditioning was for the dogs, not the soldiers. But by virtue of living there, we got to. But during the summer, you'd go out and you just turn the water on. And even, you had cold and hot water, but you just turn the water on and the steam would come out. And that's if you turn the cold water on. That's how hot it was during the day. And when I came home during the spring for my R&R, we all went to, actually it was in the summer, I'm sorry. We went to Disney World. And so we're in Disney World. My wife, who's this little redhead from Scotland, does not do well in the heat at all. And my kids, they were off in the shade and sweating buckets. And I was standing in all the lines with the sun beating down on me going, what's the problem?
Yeah,
this
is good.
I was nice and comfortable. So
Thank you, Peter. And we're about 10 minutes past time here, so I figured I'd wrap it up here. If anybody has any final thoughts or comments, I want to thank Josh, Derek, John, Hughes, Carl, everyone who contributed, Justin, this evening to commemorating this invasion, hearing much more about it, understanding not only the micro level down on the ground, but really, Hughes, your perspective was really valuable as well. Looking at it from sort of the 10,000 foot level. But Todd, any final thoughts here before we sign off?
Karen Sudkamp here says summer was routinely around 120. Baghdad had dry heat, but if you were in Basra or
Qasr,
it could be 120 plus horrendous humidity. The South was not fun in the summer.
I can imagine the entirety of Iraq really wasn't fun. I wouldn't define it as fun.
Thank you all so much for
you.
sharing these memories. I have so many more questions for all of you, but I know it's late. And who's going to say something?
I would like to just add one closing point. As we talked about medical and previous wars in comparison to the wars today, our medical corps has come so far and so advanced. Where we lost in World War II in Vietnam, we lost a lot of the soldiers on the battlefield. Where they was revived, in our current war, more of them are revived, which leaves those hidden wounds.
Right.
That as a country, we got to be prepared, and as veteran service organizations, we have more amputees running around because in the past where they might have been KIAs, now they're revived and they come home, and we got to still deal with those issues. And so those are some of the battles that as veteran service organizations that we fight every day, that people got to realize the number of casualties, the importance of the VA system today, and the people that we have that needs that care, because we've lost less soldiers than they did in Vietnam, and World War II. We got a whole lot less casualties, even though as long as we've been fighting it, we have a whole lot less casualties. KIAs, we have a lot more casualties, but the KIAs are less.
Lower KIAs means more TBIs,
Right.
Yeah.
It's a great point, Carl. Thank you for
PTSD.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for ending on that note. It's a great one to end on. David and Terry, both a good chip on your shoulder there. But thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Hoping that you will join us. Let's see here. Monday night. What do we have coming up Monday night, Todd?
Oh, Monday night we're going to be discussing. We're going to have on Pete Mecca, who's interviewed 400 veterans. He himself is a Vietnam Air Force veteran, and he's going to be one of our guests. We're just going to have a lot of open conversation on Monday night. But everybody enjoy the rest of your 205th Pittsburgh birthday night. I'm sure you have a lot of festivities planned for it.
Will do. I got that Iron City lined up. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great evening.
Right.
Great program.
Take care. Thank you.